Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019 Advanced. In the preceding section we looked at sorting, and in this section we're going to take a more detailed look at filtering. Now, as I'm sure you'll realise, when you're sorting, filtering or grouping, you're not making any changes to data. You're only changing what can be seen, and there are no actual changes to the underlying data. So let's start with a very straightforward example of filtering. Let's suppose that I wanted to filter this particular view of version 9 of the website project on duration. Now I have a duration column and I have the little drop down on the right there, the auto filter option. And when you click on the little drop down, you'll see, apart from the sort options that you can see there and the group by option that we're going to look at in the next section, we also have filters. Now basically the filters are really in two groups. So immediately below the word filter, there is a set of checkboxes, and you can enable or disable which values you want to see specifically and individually. So if I wanted to filter on, for example, only tasks with a duration of 30 or 37.5 days, I can select both of them, click on OK, and my filter will be applied. And notice that you can also see the corresponding summary tasks as well, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. Once you've applied a filter, you get that familiar little filter symbol up in the heading next to where it says duration. And if you want to clear the filter, just click on it again and select Clear Filter from Duration. So that's the option of using that set of checkboxes. But also, if we click on it again and hover over filters, you'll see we get a pop-out menu out to the right, which gives us another set of filtering options. And exactly what you see in here will depend on the data type for the column. Now, in this particular case, the type of data is duration. So we see a set of filters that are appropriate for a duration. So for instance, we have 1 day or less, between a day and a week or longer, etc. But then we also get a whole range of filters which cover a very adaptable range. So for instance, we could say greater than, and I get the custom auto filter dialog. Now with this, I can specify a single condition or two conditions. So I could say is greater than, and let's say 10 days, and is less than 40 days, and click on OK. And there we have that filter applied. Now, of course, you can build this custom filter up with one or two of those specific conditions, and you can see in the drop down there what those conditions are. So we have equals, does not equal, is greater than, so on and so forth. It's worth noting that in some cases these operators are more appropriate, say for text. So for instance, the last one, contains exactly. You might use that if you were looking at whether a particular text term included a specific phrase. So I've created my custom auto filter. Note the option here to save that as a filter definition. I'll come back to that in a moment. So let's click on OK again. And once again, we can see those tasks with durations in that range. And again, I can clear the filter quite simply by clicking on the filter icon and selecting Clear Filters from Duration. Now, just to illustrate the point I made earlier, if I move on to the Start column and click on the Filter drop-down, there I have a set of checkboxes for filtering, although these are arranged according to the calendar, as this is basically a date data type column. But if I look at the filters on the right, I get a set of filters that are appropriate for a date. So specifically things like today, tomorrow, yesterday, and more generally next week, this week, last week, so on and so forth. And once again, right down at the bottom, I get a custom option, and I have two conditions that I can specify. I can use one or two of those and combine them with an and or an or. When you come to use this custom auto filter dialog, as I mentioned just now, one of the options, once you've put together a filter that you want to keep, is to click on Save. And you can save it with a name. And you also have the option to make the filter definition more complex, as I'll show you in just a moment. Note that when you use this option, you have a checkbox here to show related summary rows or not. Note also that you can decide whether you want to show this saved filter in the menu with the checkbox in the top corner. And in fact, we'll be looking at this filter definition dialog a little bit later on in this section. Now bear in mind that you can apply filters to more than one column at a time. So for instance, if I wanted to apply a filter to duration, so let's click our drop down, go to filter and say greater than, and we're going to say greater than 20 days and click on OK. And maybe now I also want to filter on start, and this time I'm going to filter for everything that starts next month. So now essentially I have two filters applied, and you can see them indicated by the filter icons in the column headings. So that's the approach to applying filters using the columns in the table. Now there are some situations in which you can filter a view where the view itself doesn't have a table. So for instance, with a network diagram, you can apply filters, but you obviously can't use columns in a table because there isn't a table. In all situations where you can apply a filter though, you can use the other option, and the one that I'm going to demonstrate next, which is to use the filter option in the data group on the View tab. So let's jump up to the View tab. And in the data group, we have a filter option. And if I click the drop down, you'll see we have lots of different options that we can select in here. So I could filter for active tasks, completed tasks, critical, so on and so forth. But we're going to jump straight down into more filters. And this gives me a range of tasks and resource filters, and I can choose one of those to apply. Note that many of these also include parameters. So for example, in the case of this cost greater than filter, we've got an ellipses at the end, so ... which means that if you use this filter, the user will be required to specify a cost value that the filter will use to select tasks whose cost is greater than the specified value. With each of these filters, if you click on Edit, you can see the definition of the filter. Now in the case of this particular one, cost greater than, the filter is based on cost and is greater than. But rather than specifying a fixed value, the value is shown in a definition here. And the definition is in the form of a prompt between double quotes. And then a question mark afterwards, indicating that it's actually going to be a question that the user is asked. And the user's answer to that question will be the value, the parameter value for the cost, which the filter will use as the cost to be greater than for the filter tasks. Now, as I mentioned just now, within this filter definition dialog, you have the Show in Menu checkbox towards the top right there, and also the Show Related Summary Rows checkbox towards the bottom left. So that's what a typical filter definition looks like. Now, one of the options in here, of course, is to create a new filter of your own. And as you probably have worked out by now, there are 2 or 3 ways of doing that. One of them is to click on New, which will give you a brand new filter definition dialog box to start with. You can also, of course, copy an existing filter and use that as a starting point for a new one. I should point out here, of course, that it's not a good idea to amend the standard filters. If you are going to base a filter on an existing filter, once again, I would always recommend that you copy the existing filter and then edit that one, or that you at the very least save a copy of the filter before you change it. So let's take a look at a filter definition for a custom filter. So we're going to go up to the View tab, into the data group, and back into that filter option. And if I click the drop down, you'll see underneath custom, I have in progress and behind schedule. And that's a custom filter that I've set up. So I'm going to go down into more filters. I'm going to select that one, and I'm going to click on Edit. As you can tell from the name, In Progress and Behind Schedule, there are in effect two elements to this particular filter. First of all, in progress. Well, we can check whether a task is in progress using a pair of conditions. Actual start does not equal NA, so that means that we have recorded a start date, which normally means we've done some tracking on that task, so it's started. And actual finish equals NA. That's the opposite for actual finish. The fact that it's still set to NA means that it has no value and therefore the task is not finished. So we're going to interpret that here as the task being in progress. Now, behind schedule, there are a number of ways of measuring this, but the one that is applied here is to calculate the SV value, the schedule variance value. Now, I'm assuming you know enough about earned value analysis to understand SV. If you're not so sure about earned value analysis, I'm going to cover it in some detail later on in the course. But for the moment, think of it this way. If SV is negative, the task is behind schedule. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a change to this custom filter, and I'm actually going to change this one. Now, I'm not going to save the original, I'm actually going to make the change here. And the change I'm going to make is this. The project generally is not going too well, but I'm a little bit behind with updates as well. So what I'm going to look for is not SV less than 0, but I'm going to look for SV being more negative than I'd like it to be. So I'm going to make it an option for the user to specify what the value, which is currently 0 here, is. I might say, well, for any task, I'm only worried if its schedule variance is, say, less than minus $1,000 or minus $2,000 or something like that. So where it currently says $0, I'm going to put a double quote. And I'm going to say, enter SV limit. I'm going to close my double quote and I'm going to put a question mark on the end. And I'm going to click on Save. And now when I apply this filter, the user will be asked for this limiting value. So I'm going to click on Close. So there is the full website project version 9. Let's go up to that filter drop down again and apply In Progress and Behind Schedule. Now let me enter the original value. Let me put 0 in here for the SV limit and click on OK. And you'll see that there are actually 3 tasks really, allowing for the summary task being shown. And if I drag this out, you'll be able to see those SV values. Now let me just point out a couple of things about filters. Let me remove the filter that I just applied. So again, I'm going to click on the drop down and I'm going to say Clear Filter. And of course, I have a highlight facility here immediately above the filter. If I click on Highlight, and there is In Progress and Behind Schedule. And hopefully you'll be expecting now when I apply it that it becomes a highlight filter. So this time I'm going to enter an SV limit of minus 1,000 and click on OK. And there we go, it's highlighted all of those tasks which meet that criteria. So that's it for this section. In the next section, we'll take a look at grouping, so I'll see you then.